Guten Abend, liebes Publikum. Ich freue mich außerordentlich, Sie zu diesem Digitalen Buchtage Spezial zu begrüßen. Das Lieblingsbuch des Deutschschweizer Buchhandels ist ein Herzensprojekt des SBVV. Es freut uns jedes Jahr sehr, dass so viele Buchhändlerinnen und Buchhändler ihre Herzensbücher zur Wahl vorschlagen und so zahlreich mitmachen, um das Lieblingsbuch des Jahres zu küren. Diesen Frühling kam Gabrielle Zevin die Ehre zu, diese Auszeichnung zu erhalten, und damit übergebe ich auch schon an Christoph Hänni, der das Gespräch mit der Autorin heute Abend führen wird. Viel Vergnügen.
Thank you, Linda. So we change language now. The event is in English, as you've seen in the description. So otherwise it could be a bit difficult for Gabrielle, I think. So
ich spreche ein bisschen Deutscher, you know.
Ein bisschen, okay. Oh, that's good. Then we can, yeah.
Nicht sehr gut.
Perfect. Okay, first of all, welcome everyone who's watching from home. Yeah, it's nice that you are here. It's really a special event. I'm looking forward to the next hour to get to know Gabrielle a bit better and to ask her as many questions as possible, I hope. And on the topic of questions, the people who are watching can send in their questions. Just use the chat button and select alle, and then I should be able to see your questions and I will try to ask them as well. But yeah, now a very warm welcome to Gabrielle Zevin. It's really nice that you join us tonight, that you took the time. Yeah, for us it's night, for you it's the morning, so that you took your morning to join us and talk about your book or books. You will see that I will not only ask about tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, but about another book as well. You will probably know which one later. So first of all, congratulations on winning favorite book of the Swiss German-speaking booksellers of Switzerland. So well done on that. And not only like did you win this prize, you won lots of prizes, best book on different, like in different companies in different countries. You've been on the bestseller lists for I don't know how many weeks. I think I lost count, and like it's been a huge success. We're talking about this book, by the way. See, yeah, okay.
You've got a lot of tabs there.
Yeah.
You're ready to go.
I do, yeah. So, like, how does that make you feel, like this huge success that has been happening with Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow?
You know, I don't really feel success in the way I think people expect that you will. I think, you know, for me, I remember when I finished writing the book, it's my 10th novel, and I remember just saying to my partner that I didn't really care what happened with the book because I was satisfied with the work I had done. And in a sense, like, and I have to say, I'm somebody who like really enjoys external validation of all kinds. And so it's quite shocking for me to find myself saying this, but it felt like, you know, I'd finally written a book that pleased me, which is not to say that all the other books I think are terrible or anything like that. And so in a sense, I was very like, I was not disinterested in what was going to happen with it, but I cared less than I've ever cared before. And then of course, immediately people were like, you know, we really love the book as well. And so that was enormously gratifying. But, you know, I've been all around the world and I've had like met amazing people through this book. And I think the astounding thing for me is that, you know, when I wrote the book, it was kind of, I started researching it in 2017. But I wrote like the bulk of the text of the book during 2020, during the pandemic. And, you know, in a sense, I felt very distant from readers at that time. Like I wasn't really thinking about readers that much. I was thinking about me. And I've had so many people since that time tell me that they think that I wrote the book for them, but I always kind of think, actually, I wrote it for me. But now I've been like so many places where people will say those exact words to me, you know, that they will say, you wrote this for me. It's like, I can be in New Zealand, or I can be in Germany, or I can be anywhere. And so I think the surprising thing for me is because the characters are, you know, they're biracial, they're Korean Jews, like I am, you know, that so many people have been able to connect with this story, even though I didn't necessarily think that many people would be able to connect with it as much as they have.
Yeah. No, it's like everyone, I think, finds something in the book that just talks to them. So that's really amazing, I think, also on that level. But like when you were writing the book, did you know that you had something special, or like realize at the time?
I mean, I think with every book I've ever written, there comes a time when I know for sure that I want to quit writing that book, and that came, with this book as well, that I felt like I didn't really know enough about the topic yet. My dad is a computer programmer and I gamed most of my life, but I still didn't feel like I knew enough about the book. And, it was only sort of, and I kept I'd research some more and I'd write a little bit. And the first several years of working on it, I didn't actually make much headway. I kind of just had the book starts out with Sam and Sadie on this train platform. And that was really as far as I had gotten, for a long, long time. And then when the pandemic hit, I remember just feeling different about things. Like I didn't know, because it's hard to remember now just how scary that time was, and I didn't really know if there'd even be publishing, if there'd be more books. And so I remember thinking to myself, if I only write one more book, before the world ends, I want to just solve this book. I want to get those 2 kids off that train platform and into the world. And so I did, during that period of time, I felt like I felt more engaged with a book than I've ever felt before. I felt more less distracted, less thinking about everything else, and more just focused on the work. I would sort of dream these characters and I'd wake up and want to, just figure out the problems with it and grapple with it. I wouldn't call it fun because I don't know that writing is ever fun, but what I would say is that I felt this kind of intense engagement. And so I've kind of heard, athletes talk about it, like Boris Becker playing tennis or Michael Jordan, or something, hitting this kind of athletic feeling of the zone. And it's this idea where you kind of have enough skills to even get to that place. And so I don't know that I ever had the skills to get to this place that I would call something like the zone, until this book, as strange as that is. So it did feel different to me because I have written as many books as I have. And so I know what it feels like when you're not in that place, and again, to go back to the first part, it was this feeling of not really just feeling like I had done the work well. And so I didn't really care what happened with it because it felt like, I imagine it feels like when, you've played a great tennis match. I've never played such a match in my life, but I did, as an aside, grow up in a town where people played tennis. So I grew up in this little town. One of the places we lived was Florida, and it was this town called Boca Raton, and all the tennis players lived there. This is not that interesting a story, but I did have this job when I was a teenager where I worked fitting brassieres for athletes. And so, and in any case, my claim to fame at that job was that I once fit Steffi Graf for a bra,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So something very different than writing a book, yeah.
Right. So in fact, we were talking about how I've done hundreds of these events, but I don't think the fact that I fit Steffi Graf for a bra has ever come up before in an event.
Yeah,
it's
that's good. Yeah.
For me.
You see, so you brought something new out today. That's good. Yeah.
Yes.
So is it for you, does it make a difference when the prize, favorite book, is voted for by booksellers? Is it something special to you, or do you feel like every prize is special, or does it make a difference?
You like any prize. But that said,
I guess so, yeah.
But I actually think the bookseller prizes tend to be less political than maybe some of the other prizes. And I think because in a sense, the booksellers choose in a more practical way. They're thinking, will people want to read this? Is this the book I want to get behind? And I think it's, so in that sense, it's more reader focused than say oh, we need to give this book a prize because it's about social issues, a lot of the American prizes tend to be. And so in a sense, I know I've done the job well when the booksellers have chosen it, because I think it's a mix of having the taste of having read tons and tons of books in that year, and also a sense of will this book again work for readers, and so in a sense, I think when I've received prizes from booksellers, I really do think I've done my job well,
Yeah, you did your job well on this one, yeah.
Thank you.
So I've seen you on Jimmy Fallon, and there you said it always kind of makes you panic if you have to describe the book to other people. So I thought I am kind of panicked to have this conversation, so that I'm not alone. I thought maybe you should be as well. So like, how would you describe the book to the people who haven't read it yet?
I think it's about love, art, video games, and time. It's the story of these two people, Sam Mazer and Sadie Green, who meet as children and they play video games together. And then when they grow up, they spend their lives also making video games. And I think on the surface, it doesn't seem like that maybe is terribly interesting, but I think really what it's about for me, it's about what it is to have a creative partner and to creatively collaborate through life. I saw the book as a coming of age story, a Künstlerroman, the coming of age of an artist story, and which I didn't say on Fallon because that probably wouldn't play with the Jimmy Fallon crowd, but that's how I saw it. It's the coming of age of an artist story. What fascinated me when I was beginning to research the book and conceive of the book, I started to realize that the entire history of video games was contained within my lifetime. So modern video game history is kind of just from like the 70s to now. And so I realized that if you told like the story of video games, you would actually be also telling the story of just what it was to be a person, what it was to be an artist during that same period of time. And so that was kind of what I thought the book was about. I don't find that the book synopsizes well.
That's all good, yeah.
It has a lot of different things in it. And
that's true, yeah, it's very difficult, yeah.
And so I don't think, and maybe that points to how I like to read as well. Like, I don't know if any novels that I really love, if a book has a premise that's maybe too interesting or synopsizes too like succinctly, I wonder if it's a good novel, because I think what novels do so well is they kind of collect the mess of the whole world into them, and that was the kind of thing I was aiming to do, but the concise answer is that it's about love, art, video games, and time,
Yeah, that's very well put, yeah. So I have the first question from someone from the audience, and she writes, like, I love your book, Young Jane Young. The final part of that book, which is also a kind of choose your own adventure segment, now seems to me like a foreshadowing to tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. Had you been wanting to write something about computer games early on?
I wasn't thinking about computer games when I was writing Young Jane Young, but I did have this sense when I wrote that novel that, so it's interesting. Young Jane Young, in the period after it was published, it's a book that's kind of what I would describe as a Me Too novel, but it came out about 6 weeks before Me Too happened. And so it was not wonderful timing for that book, but then it was picked up for television and they would try to make it as a limited series. But what I found in the process of thinking about the project, the book in like long form, was I realized I had probably not written enough of that story, and that there was more I could have done with that piece of material. And, so when I think of the last section of the book, which is this kind of choose your own adventure section, I mean, it does seem like it leads into what I'm going to do in tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. I think that's probably pretty astute. But luckily, because that book, or unluckily, because that book was not very successful, very few people make this observation or point.
Okay.
But I will say that I wish I had not ended that book there. I wish it had had more after that, that in a way that book has an ending that works to me more intellectually than it actually is successful as a novel. And so the thing I sort of learned from writing that was I wanted maybe a second chance to really look at the second person point of view. I think most of the book is in what I guess you call a close third or something like that. But to really go into second person and see like, if I was to use it, could I really make it fully emotional? And so it was a chance to get it right, to really kind of master the second person point of view in the marks section which is the NPC section of the book. And so I knew, because I had tried to experiment with it before, that if it were not to just kind of kill the novel, it would need to be perfect, because anytime you make a big experimental choice, you will lose some percentage of readers, which I'm fine with. Goodbye, but also you do want to hold on to as many readers as possible when you're working.
Okay, so it's an interesting thing you just said. You said like you wished the ending was different, or I think that's what I understood. Like, do you ever wish you had written a different ending to one of your books, or several of your books, maybe?
I accept the fact that to write across many years is to live with ghost versions of yourself, And so I was talking to my other friend who's a famous novelist, because a lot of my novels, because Tomorrow did really well, are being repackaged and republished. So the choice you face is whether you're going to go and read those books again and make changes because of small things that you feel like are racist 20 years later. My first novel came out almost 20 years ago now, or things that you feel like are just small things you wouldn't do, or how much you want to honor the person you were who wrote those books, And so I kind of feel a balance of those two things. Sometimes I think if it's something that I think still honors the intention of the original person who wrote it, then I try to make those small changes, because in a sense, we don't live in a world where I think people understand that things were written in, say, 2005. It's not like, people don't necessarily have a great sense that, that we're not in a cultural space that's a sort of perpetual present. Like, for example, I've heard stories of like Ian McKellen and Lord of the Rings. So a lot of kids just see like Lord of the Rings and they stream it or something, and then they're really shocked when they encounter him in person and he's old, that kind of thing. Yeah. And so, I think that's the kind of balance you strike when you're thinking about books. But no, I mean, only, the one book of mine really that I think could have benefited from me pushing farther and trying to, was Young Jane Young. And I think in a sense, that's a sort of thing you reach because you've written a lot of books, because it doesn't like destroy your ego to say that this could have been better than it was, and at the time I was writing it, that was absolutely the best I could have done, that's the only one that I'm tempted to ever kind of revisit, and it's fairly recent. The rest of them, they're so distant that I can't even imagine going back in and changing them significantly. Though I have made small changes to books as we prepared them for new editions,
That's interesting. Thank you. So, I loved reading Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. I think there are so many observations about life you just put in one sentence, where I was like, how can you just find the words just to come up with this? Like, one of them is, if I remember correctly, is other people's parents are often a delight. And I just thought, I read that and I was like, that's so true. Yeah. So how do you come up with sentences like this? Do they just pop up? Or
I mean, in the case of that particular sentence, it's something I've experienced in life. You'll have a friend or, a significant other, and they'll have complained bitterly and brutally about, their parents. And then you meet them and they're not parents to you. They're just people, and they might be perfectly charming people. In fact, they're people that are related to this other person that you really like, and so I have had that experience in life. It's not like I'm trying to be necessarily pithy or something like that. I'm really trying to express things that I think are true, and I think the older you get, the more you know things that are true, and so it's kind of like that. But I will say, just there are novelists that emerge fully formed, and that their first novels are great, and that they just seem to kind of just arrive fully evolved. I think of Zadie Smith or someone like that. And, for me, I think I don't really know that I knew fully how. I feel like with each book I wrote, I learned more and was able to do more and push farther. I feel like the books improved over time. And so I always want to say that we have, at least, I don't know if it's the same in Switzerland, but in the US, our culture is really geared up around the fantastic debut. Everybody loves somebody who's new, but in fact, it's ignoring the fact that most people in every profession get better from having done a thing, and I think that's something I think about with my own books,
Okay, so the more you write, the better you get, or you find the.
I mean, I think if you stay open, not everybody gets better. I think some writers kind of find a groove and they kind of stay in that groove. So I think of writers that kind of do, sort of maybe character series or more genre type work, and then I think there are some writers that maybe they aren't, better isn't the right word, they're on a different journey. So they're trying to do different experimental things, and their work may become more esoteric or more it just move in different directions, more experimental things, etc. But I think many novelists do, if they can stay open to the idea and not be so like, it's a balance of being, I think, critical of yourself but also being thick-skinned enough to keep generating work, and so I think if you can kind of strike that balance, then to me, what has always been interesting was to figure out, can I do this better? It's been part of whatever better means. Better can mean
that's true. Yeah.
many different things,
Yeah. Okay. So like
more
you already
expressive, more expressive, more interesting prose, more complicated ideas, more things that seem to express what it is to be a human being on the planet, in ways. And so I guess that's what I mean by better.
Yeah, I think the book does jump like from time or in time, and sometimes they haven't talked to each other in a long time. I think it's at the beginning of the book, so it's really interesting like how you do that. I think you wouldn't probably have done that in your first novel, I guess.
No, I mean, some of it is just like I realized things as I wrote more books, like that my superpower was going to be how many times I can go over a piece of material. So like I will read everything I've written to the moments that I'm going to start writing again every day. And so when a book gets up to like 500 pages, it starts to be a lot of reading every day, but I can do it pretty fast, but I want to be in the same place as I think where my reader is. Or something else that I think I picked up over the years was just, I think a weakness of certain novels I read is this feeling, and probably some of my early novels as well, is the feeling that the writer is kind of meeting the characters as they are writing. And so you have the first 100 to 150 pages and it feels like they're getting to know this person. But I really, with this book, wanted to feel like I knew who I was writing from page one, and it seems like it's a fine point, but when you kind of know everything about a person, like, how they feel about things, where they're going in their life, what they want, you can write them differently. You're able to move in a way through time that's quite different,
So that's, I wanted to ask, like, how did you come up with the characters, like of Sadie and Sam? Did you have them like fully formed in your head, or did they evolve during the writing process? How did that go? Because like, they are both like, you like them, you hate them sometimes, you're just like frustrated. Like, were they there when you started writing?
I mean, I have so many answers to that question, but I think, for me, the truth of it is it's hard to write anybody else until you know yourself pretty well, and that you can kind of see yourself clearly, what's like good about you, what's shitty about you, and everything in between. Because in a sense, you have to acknowledge that when you write a book, the place from which all characters emerge are from you. There's nothing that is an inescapable reality of any book that I write. And so I think, when you're writing a character, you are sort of acknowledging the distance between you and this imaginary person. So some of the distances are close. Like a lot of things about Sadie are like me, I think like we have kind of, in certain ways we have similar economic backgrounds, certain things are similar in our backgrounds. We both know what it is to be, I think, underestimated for being women or for all these variety of things. And so there are ways in which Sadie is close to me, and there are ways in which Sam is very close to me. We have the same ethnic background, and but he has his disability, which is something that is different than I have in my life. And so to understand, it's hard to write anybody else until you understand your own like prejudices and privileges, basically, And so that's where I sort of started from. I don't think, I really just kept going over them and over them until I got to a place where I felt like I could write them. And then sometimes that would mean I'd have to do something completely again, because there was some key piece of information I had gotten wrong or something like that. But yeah, it was honestly just like laborious. It was just like a lot of time of, thinking and refining and who are these people and that kind of thing, before I came to a thing that I liked. So really, there's no short answer to that. I find when I'm talking to young writers, they're often asking me for like, how do I get there fast? I'm like, there is no getting there fast in any way in a career. I think all of it is sort of like hard won. But I didn't mind it. I liked the sort of like iterative process of writing this book, going back over.
Yeah, and I think you can feel like you really feel the characters, or you had them in you, because they are really like close to life, and you think you have every emotion you go through with them. So that's really nice to see. Yeah.
Well, I like that people like love them and hate them, as you say. Like, I like that they feel so frustrated with them and they wish they would do other things. And, you know, in a sense, I think that maybe when I was younger, and maybe certain writers I read, they seem to be writing characters to validate themselves in some way. You know, these characters do not validate me in any way. You know, they are like I mean, just again, I don't see Sadie as an asshole. I don't see Sadie as like a terrible person in the way I think some people see her. I see her as somebody who wants to be successful more than she wants to be nice. You know, she wants to be, and also I always want to defend Sadie particularly and say, you know, in the end, they're all younger than 35 for most of the book. It's not like they figured out everything yet. And for most of the book, Sadie's in her 20s. But I wanted to write about that. And for Sam as well, this kind of, what I see is sometimes maybe a missing time in fiction, this kind of period after one graduates from college, when you feel like, you know, the Torschlusspanik, you know, and you're thinking like, I just have to like make my mark on this world before, you know, time runs out. You know, I want to again, this kind of period of wild ambition that doesn't necessarily coordinate with your optimal time of being kind or nice or that kind of thing. And I thought I had experienced that myself, you know. I don't think I was really like, you know, maybe, I don't know that I was a fully, I don't want to say kind person, but I wouldn't say I was a fully evolved person in certain ways until I was maybe like 40, you know, and then I started to be okay to know,
okay, yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I think it takes time to be the person you are. That's true. So and sometimes you are kind. That's true. So I got some more questions from the people who are watching. So first, yeah, you said it's about video games. And one person said, I love video games. What was your favorite video game growing up?
Oh, it's funny because, by the way, I do say it's about video games, but I always want to actually tell people that it's really about video game designers. You know, it's about people who make things, you know, and so I always want to correct myself when I say that, because I think it's really less about video games than it is about artists generally. But my favorite video game growing up, probably, well, my dad was a computer programmer, so the first games I ever played were games that came preloaded on a like work PC that he brought home. So I remember one of the first games on that I ever played that was on that computer was a game called Alley Cat. Alley Cat is about this like cat who has to jump up on garbage cans and then onto a fence to jump into like the back window of a variety of different apartments. And then there's like a mini game inside each of these windows. And I think about that game all the time because whenever I'm walking past like an apartment building, I think how inside each of these windows, you know, there's the whole world, you know, like there's like a different play, a different novel in every window, in every house, in the whole world, you know. And so I liked this game because it was fun, but also because I think it really expressed something about being human. When I was a little older, a game that I loved was King's Quest IV, probably because it was the first game I ever played that had a female protagonist. You know, it's the fourth in the series of adventures in this kingdom, and a lot of the game requires that you know things about literature to solve the puzzles, like if you know not to open Pandora's box, you're going to do better in this game, that kind of thing, you know? And so that was another game that I loved. It's based in a lot of fairy tale and that kind of thing. You know, so those were some games that I loved when I was younger. My dad had this thing because he thought like video game consoles were bad. So he was fine with anything I wanted to play on like a PC, but he didn't want me to play they wouldn't let me have a video game console. So I didn't have one of those until I was an actual grown-up person. Actually, so any video games I played on a console were at like friends' houses. That kind of thing.
Yeah. So like in the book, like you describe all these games, and I'm not a huge gamer. I play Mario Kart from time to time, but then I thought like everyone you describe, I thought I want to play this game right now. So they just sound so fun. Like, how did you come up with these ideas for the games?
You know, all kinds of things, really. Like, so I had played a lot but I never thought of myself as a gamer. I've never described myself that way. There's not a single reference to video games in any of my books before Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. but I had somehow played quite a lot of games by the time I went to write this book. And yet I had not played in a way that was ever with an ulterior motive. I never played any game other than for the reason that I thought, oh, I think this game will be fun to play, But when I went to write this book, I didn't want my designers to be limited by what my taste had been. And so I pursued it kind of like an English major or a literature major pursuing the study of video games. And so I kind of formed a little canon, and I would dip into all of these games that were considered the groundbreaking games for any given year, because I wanted to know what would the taste of an elite video game designer be, because that would not have been my taste. And so when it came to writing what the games were going to be, I would look at what was popular in any given year, what was like the top 10 games, what was really selling, which would give me indications about what the technology was able to do. And then because I wanted Sam and Sadie to seem visionary, I would always push it a little past what the technology could do, And then also the games, and this was part of the earliest kind of conception of the book, the games they made needed to tell the story of their lives, So it was always like, how is Sadie in this game? How is Sam in this game? How do their backgrounds become the games that they play, and how do they reflect the times that they live in and the technology that's at hand. And so it was this kind of process. I didn't find it super complicated. I knew, although it just sounded complicated, I know, but it actually was. What I mean to say is, it seemed obvious to me sometimes what the games like could be and should be. But yeah, I always had some game that I was, or sometimes like a dozen games that I would be referencing to come up with this game,
And I've seen that they did Emily Blaster, so I played this week, which was fun. Yeah. Are there any other games planned? Like, are they producing some of the ideas you wrote in the book?
I mean, I've had some people reach out to me, but I always want to preface that by saying, so like a game like Ichigo, to make Ichigo would probably take a studio that had at least 100 people working on it. It would probably maybe cost like, I don't know, $80 million or something like that. I mean, it's not to make it for something that people would enjoy. You could make it in a small way at like an independent studio, but if it was made by, say, a AAA gaming studio or something, it'd be wildly expensive. It would take 5 years to make. And in the end, there's no guarantee that somebody would like it. So I had a lot less burden in creating these games than an actual game designer would. But yes, people have reached out to me about various of the games in the book, and it would be really fun to see one of those come out the other side. But I'm also quite sympathetic about how much work it would take to make, like, Our Infinite Days or something into an actual game that people would like,
So I got some more questions, so I'll try to ask those ones. So the next one is about the cover of Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. In German, your previous books were packaged like feel-good books, especially Fickery, it seems. That always frustrates me a bit as a bookseller, because I feel like the client looks at the jacket and says, oh, it's one of those. A city person finds happiness and purpose in the countryside. And then I have to, and I then have to work so much hard at convincing them that it's so much more. So I love that the German publisher adapted the cover art this time. Did you have a lot of input, say, into the cover art of your book? And yeah, that's what I wanted to ask as well. I think almost all the editions took like the same picture. They tweaked it a little, but they all took the same cover. Was that like your idea?
It's been very cool that they've all kind of kept the same look. But no, I mean, obviously the picture on the cover is the Hokusai Great Wave off Kanagawa, which is described in the book. And I think I put on my website that picture when I was saying, hey, I have a book coming out, but there was no jacket yet at that point. I remember a long time had passed and we hadn't seen a jacket from Knopf, who's my American publisher. And I said to my agent, I'm like, hey, do you think they want any ideas from me or anything like that? And they were like, no, we think we're the best art department in the country, and we don't want any of your ideas. So I was like, great, we'll wait and see what happens. But eventually an email comes in, and that can be a very like fraught and scary time, because you don't know if you're preparing to like fight or if you're going to be excited about what shows up. What showed up is exactly what everyone used. And so immediately I was like, this is it. This feels like exactly what the book is like, this kind of mix of this modern text that suggests video games with this very retro, the hokusai, which also, by the way, reflects the technology of that time, which is printing, and so I think the mix of these two elements really was perfect, and I feel the same frustration, and I agree with kind of the way the books have been jacketed in German before. I think, I understand it, but I think it's really, I will say, I feel fortunate in that most of my publishers abroad have embraced this imagery. But oftentimes as an author, you have a jacket approval. And the fact is, even if I strongly don't see why a certain jacket is going to work for my book, what's usually said to me is, well, you don't understand our market. So even if I'm like, this looks like, for instance, the German jacket of Young Jane Young, with all due respect to that publisher, it's not the same one I currently have. It's like a woman and she's like tossing her hat, or something, that kind of thing. And, I don't think it's like horrible, but, I'm quite sure I raised, like, I don't know if this captures what the book is, that kind of thing. But usually what is said is, you don't understand. But I recently had this issue, not in Germany or Switzerland, but with one of my books. And I said, listen, I'd rather pay back the advance than have it jacketed this way. I think this is so far off. And I've never said that before, but I also never had the ability to say that before. So they were like, but yes, I mean, the truth is, I don't live in, whatever, with what that market is. I don't have years of experience to bring to what will work. And so you're sort of at the mercy of what's being told to you works for them. But yeah, to my eye, I do sometimes think this doesn't, I maybe don't know the market, but I do know my book, and I'm not sure that this captures that. But it's a balance you strike, if you feel like that publisher, I don't know, I've rarely seen, I will say, when I've given notes on a jacket, I have rarely improved it in any way. Usually when people like, it just dilutes whatever the original impulse is, and so like, I remember there was a jacket for a book I had written many years ago in England, and it was this terrible jacket that had it looked almost like a romance novel. It had like a brooding looking man and a woman. And I said, I really don't like how this works. I don't like this jacket. And all that came back when they did the jacket again was they had superimposed another version of that man on this man's head. So there was like a little like romantic scene on his head. And I'm like, this isn't improving the matter at all. But so I'm always very reluctant to give any kind of notes. It's like, if we're gonna go with that, if the woman's just gonna be tossing her hat, then that's what we're going to do. That's what, Okay. But they often do rejacket again. I think when if a book does well enough, then you see it'll be jacketed one more time, so maybe that will happen for some of my books in Germany. That would be nice.
We hope so. Because it's true, Fikri isn't like a good cover, but
it's like the blue stripy one.
It is the blue stripe. So
talking about, it has a strange title in German, doesn't it?
It has a very strange
something
title.
Of happiness or something.
Of happiness. That's it. So another question is, like, when we speak about different language editions, are you involved when a book of yours gets translated? Are there things that are particularly important to you in a translation?
It's hard to know. So I speak a little of a lot of languages, but not, I would say, enough to read very well in any of them. But occasionally I will pick up a book of mine in another language and I will know immediately it's a bad translation.
Okay.
There will be choices made right at the get-go that I'm like, I know this is not going to go well. But I mean, that's only in the languages in which I have a passable reading knowledge of some kind. And usually it has to be an obvious, strange gaffe, Like I have a book called Elsewhere, and it's about the afterlife. And, the book in English starts out with the words, the end came quickly and there wasn't any pain. So a book about the afterlife. And it's a book that, again, starts at it's a book about where time moves backwards. So it's very particular that it starts with the words, the end. So when I see a translation that does not start with the words, the end, I know that we're probably in for something not great, I think I try to be helpful to the translators when they send me questions. I'm grateful to the foreign translators because they sometimes pick up on things that the American copy edit didn't pick up, and that we then integrate again because they're great readers. I think that, you're really at the mercy of that person. Like it's hard to say if something is sometimes a good translation or not. I think it's actually unknowable. In a sense, they have to write their own book. And I can't participate in that book in that way. You have a sense sometimes when you read the reviews that things were done in the translation that are different than, not different, but things are done in the translation that are evoking a different experience maybe than the one you've intended. But yeah, in a way, you have to just give it up to and just say, like, I give this to you. I hope this works out, But I do think I have had times when I've known that the translation maybe even improved upon the book. Like there was one book I had where I think, in a way it became such a big bestseller in that particular territory that I feel like the translation must have been particularly good, so that's a possibility too, I guess, but I don't think there's much control you have. Sometimes I'll be sent questions from a translator and they will reflect such a lack of understanding the material that it freaks me out. Like I get scared. I'm like, oh no, if you're asking this, then I'm worried. And then I will kind of like try to answer them very gently, or sometimes decline to answer some of them because at that point they're on their own journey. But
okay.
But I'm happy to answer questions, especially with tomorrow. A lot of the foreign translators had trouble with so Ichigo is neither a boy nor a girl. And so in a sense, if you're, translating into Spanish, for example, it's difficult to deal with the pronouns, a they pronoun, and that kind of thing has been a recurring issue across many of the foreign translations,
Interesting. Yeah, that's true because not every
right.
language or
so they have to make choices about it sometimes. Like it's literally unconveyable in certain languages, what I'm trying to say with that.
So just someone said, reminds me of the quote by R.F. Kuang from Bubble, every act of translation is an act of betrayal. Would you agree to that?
Well, I think R.F. Kuang is really young, so I'm not experiencing it all as betrayal, I will say, because there's the possibility that, as I said, it's an act of improvement. It's certainly an act. But I don't know that I'm all the way to betrayal. In a sense, we live in a world where many languages are spoken. I think one of the great gifts of my life has been learning languages. I don't really learn to try to achieve fluency. I like learning languages because I think it improves my language in English, but also because I think it brings me closer to the world and all the people in it, and I think you can see it as an act of betrayal, or you can see it as an act of beauty. And I've read Babel, by the way, so I know what she's saying.
Yeah,
but I also want to say that it's translation is imperfect, but it's the only way we have to talk to all the rest of the people on the planet. And so you hope that a person brings to translation a sense of all the things I was talking about before, of their privilege, of their prejudices, of a deep sense of language, a deep knowledge of the first text and all of that. And I don't know that always happens, but for me, I don't live in, and I did really like it. If I didn't say that, I thought Babel was terrific. But I don't necessarily experience it as an act of betrayal.
That's good then. So someone else wrote, how long did it take to write Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow? You said you started in 2017, and then
I started researching at the end of 2017, and then I wrote it really across those years, intermittently quitting it to research some more, and then I wrote probably again a good 80% of it during 2020, and then mostly the draft that was finished in 2020 is the one you will have read today, with the exception of one section which I wrote in 2021. And that's the section that is in between, for anyone who's already read the book, the NPC and pioneers. So there's a section called Our Infinite Days, which is a section that I added. Because when that section is not there, there's a time break that's much bigger, you know, and so I really wanted to follow these characters through that time and not sort of let go of them. But, you know, so basically it was written over about 5 years, I would say.
Okay. Oh yeah, that's a long time then, yeah. And
it is and it isn't, you know, it's like you don't, you know, I was reading Lauren Groff somewhere talking about how much of the time you don't spend writing, how much of the time you spend finding the novel and figuring out how you feel about the material and that kind of thing. And I find that that's true. I think sometimes what's lost sight of, do you participate in Switzerland in National Novel Writing Month? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, we don't have that here. No, we don't.
Okay, so they have this thing called National Novel Writing Month, and basically the idea of it is, I think it's in November or something, where if you write 1,000 words a day, at the end of like X number of days, you'll have a novel, you know, and that's certainly not the way I think of novel writing. You know, it kind of eliminates the idea that there are some days where you don't need to write. There are some days where you are going to, you know, want to think about the material. And so in any case, I feel like, you know, the writing itself is relatively short compared to the conceptual work that you do, you know.
Yeah. So like, what does your writing process look like? Do you have like every day you write your, as you said, 1,000 words, or do you like just write when you feel like it, or when, yeah, like how does that look like?
I mean, at a certain point you have to be writing every day, otherwise you're not going to get to the novel. But, you know, for me, you know, I feel like if I've made mistakes with writing novels before, it's maybe starting too early, before I really knew what you know, trying to find the book while you're writing it. It's better to know as much as you can before you go into it, you know? And so there's more of that for me now, the sort of like research and just really making sure I've done the conceptual work right. When I'm writing, I am writing every day. When I'm actually working on the physical writing of the book, I'm writing every day. I got into like napping. The idea, so I would like, you know, get up in the morning, write, and then I would like exercise and eat lunch, and then I'd take a nap, and then when I'd wake up again and walk the dog, I would write again, you know, and so that kind of allowed me to have like two writing periods in a given day. I actually believe I don't write so well when I'm not well rested, you know. I think like my brain really needs to be working well, you know, to write well. You know, so that was more of the process. I think, you know, I take a lot of notes, both in longhand and on like, you know, on my phone and all those places. And because I have found that it is better to write things down, that you don't actually remember them. So I have copious amounts of like research material and notes. And I think, you know, there's no one process that works. I remember the first event I ever did as a writer, when my first novel came out, or actually my second novel came out, but anyway, but I was doing an event with an author, like an older author, and she was describing her process, and she was saying like, I write my books on a chaise longue, and I have like, I play classical music for myself, and I light a candle, and then when I'm ready, I finally write. I remember thinking, well, I wrote like my entire book sitting on like the one couch that was in my studio apartment at the time, you know, and I entertained on that couch and like, you know, had, you know, ate on that couch and worked on that couch and did everything on that couch. And so I think there are ways in which people fall in love with the aestheticization of the process of writing that has very little to do with the kind of like the nuts and bolts of actually writing something, you know. I think there is no one process that works, you know, and I said it to you before, you know, I think young writers, they're often looking for what is the thing that is going to get me to do the thing you do fast? You know, what is the process I can follow? Can I buy a certain set of pens? And I'm not saying I was not like that, because I was deeply looking for, how do you get this thing done? What is the computer you use? Shall I, you know, what kind of like word processor, you know, and they want all these kind of like things you can do, but I don't know that there are any things you can do. You have to go like live your life, be open to the world, you know, and talk to people and listen, you know, and like I don't know that there are any shortcuts with that kind of thing.
Good. So there's someone else who's written something. It says, as a writer myself, I deeply loved how the process and struggles of developing and promoting, etc., a piece of art were described in this book. I could identify so much with many of the feelings and experiences the protagonists had. I love that it is not just about video games, but artistic life in general. So that's not a question, but it's like something about the book.
I mean, that's exactly,
yeah.
I mean, that's exactly how I wanted people to read the book. I don't think when I started out, I really understood, well, I was like somebody who was really afraid to fail at things, you know, I had been kind of this like overachiever girl, you know, and I think I didn't understand how much like failure was going to be a part of every creative life, you know, that you can, I wanted to convey, you know, in Sam and Sadie's story, like after they do Ichigo and it's a success, you know, I wanted to show what it was to like completely invest yourself in something fully, to absolutely be convicted that it will work, and then to have it not work. You know, I've had this happen, you know, but I don't know that I've seen it depicted as much, like kind of what creative failure looks like, you know, and how creative failure isn't necessarily as simple as that work was bad. Sometimes it's about the marketplace it enters into. Sometimes it's that you've done something too visionary. Sometimes it's that it was bad, you know, but usually what is true is that it didn't work for that particular point in time. An interesting thing I think is, you know, when people talk about the games from the book that they really want to play, nobody ever says they want to play both sides, which I think is a really creatively interesting game.
Yeah,
I think the reason they never say they want to play it because I've described it as a failure. So they think it must be no good. But in fact, that's not what I'm trying to say there. I'm saying to them that this is a game that didn't work commercially, but it wasn't necessarily an artistic failure, you know?
Yeah, that's interesting. So like we need still to talk one other book, I think, which is this one. Can you see? So like
you don't have the German copy.
Yeah. No, it's the English one. It's a much better cover. Yeah. So like, because we are like in a group of booksellers and publishers, and this book is about bookselling. So for me, it was like, it felt like a love letter to booksellers, to bookselling. Was it meant that way?
It was meant that way. You know, I think I can say though, it wasn't like I was as calculating or as outward directed as that. You know, so the book was written around 2000, from 2011 to 2013-ish, you know, in that range. And so in the US, what was happening then were tons of bookstores were closing down, you know, independent bookstores were not doing well. The big chain, we had two big chains there. They were at that time, Barnes and Noble and Borders. Borders closed, you know, and so that's half as many bookstores in the country. But this isn't true anymore. We have a lot more bookstores these days in the US. But at that time, I remember thinking, I had a question for myself, which was like, does it truly matter if people buy books online or if they shop in stores? And what is really the purpose of a bookstore? Like, what does a bookstore do and what does it add to a community? Most of my books have started with a question in that way. And so I wanted to answer that question for myself, like, do bookstores matter? Does physical print matter? And that kind of thing. And so I think that's where that book started from, just kind of trying to grapple with what seemed like an existential crisis for bookstores in America at that time, you know. And, you know, if you read the book, you'll see that I conclude that it does matter. And I think it turns out it matters in so many different ways, you know. But it was a story for me, you know, I guess to describe the book, it's a bit like Silas Marner, you know, or something like that. A man finds a baby not in his farmhouse or whatever, but in a bookstore, you know.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, to me, this was a nice allegory for, I think, many of us, you know, who feel that we have found ourselves in bookstores, you know. If you look at the book, it's about this man who at the beginning of the story, AJ Fikry, tells you, he fully lays out everything he hates as a bookseller, you know, like he doesn't like magic realism, he doesn't like series, he doesn't like movie tie-in editions, he doesn't like all of these things and all of these genres. And, you know, a lot of that was like genres that I had written or things I had done in my own career. But for me, the conceit of the book was this man who, again, has all these things that he hates, and his life becomes many of the things that he hates, you know? he ends up in this kind of like sentimental story, you know. and in a sense, to me, it was about how in life you don't always get to choose like the genre you find yourself in, you know, like if you get cancer, you're all of a sudden in a science fiction movie, you know, or whatever it is. And so I wanted to write somebody like that who had all this idea of taste, and all of that just gets blown away when he has a child enter his life, you know. And I think it's funny because it's in many ways the opposite book of Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. You know, it's a book that is very small. It wasn't to me that I think it is actually more complicated than people understand it to be, you know, because it's very much about storytelling. Everybody, it is a kind of writer telling stories about things. But in a sense, you know, to speak to the other person's comment, you know, if you put a cover on it that says like, this is going to be an adorable story about like written by a woman, and like, then it has a vibe that's different than if you say, if Michael Chabon had written that book, it would have probably been marketed and packaged in a different way. And so it is interesting to see people read it now from the other direction. I've enjoyed that. Like people maybe note more of its complexities than they did when it had no context. But the books I had written before that in the adult space were like very tough books, you know, like this book, The Hole We're In, which they've recently repackaged here. It's about the Iraq War. It's about, you know, female soldiers and all this. And so at that time, that was really a departure for me. But then the book did really, really well. And so it kind of took on this life of its own, you know, until Tomorrow. Like it was actually the book that allowed me to write Tomorrow, because the book did so well commercially. It sold like close to 1 million copies in the US, and it sold like, I think 6 million copies not in Germany, 6 million copies in China, you know. And so it was like this huge success in ways that changed my life, because I didn't have to write as quickly. So, you know, like you were saying, 5 years is a long time on Tomorrow. Well, that's because I finally had time to think like, you know, now that I'm not like racing, like under the gun and feeling to have to write every year, like what would you do if given more time? And so in a way, it's like the success that was really life-changing to me wasn't Tomorrow's success, but it was the success of this book, Fikri, this modest little novel, you know, that people really embrace. And it's been great because I think I visited thousands of bookstores to promote the book all around the world. And that itself was so pleasurable, you know, just
can imagine,
feeling really like connected again with the whole community of people that sell books. I will say, like, last thing, just, you know, when I published my first novel, which was several novels before Fikri, I think Fikri was my 8th. When I published my first novel, I had no idea about anything past the writing of a book. I had no idea how a book made it from like a publisher to a bookstore, like that there were people called like sales reps or publishers reps, and that they like sold the books into stores. Like I didn't know about any of that. I didn't know why some books sat on the table and some books sat on the shelf, or that there were like, I knew nothing really about the process of publishing a book. In a way, I thought it just began and ended with me. And so part of writing Fikri was thinking about all the things that need to happen to make a book work. You know, how many people need to say like, read this, you know, you should read this. And so that was that book as well.
Yeah, and it was really nice. Like for a book seller, just reading it, I was like, it was just so nice to have someone tell our story, I'd say. And when I, like, in the beginning, you described the work of a sales rep, and I was a sales rep as well. And it's like, this woman must have worked as a sales rep. So it seems you didn't. So
no, but I knew them for the first time. You know, in the US, when you go on book tour, depending on how big your publishers are small, I had been published with relatively small publishers in the US. And so the sales reps would drive you around on book tour, you know, so I was aware that they had a job to do. And actually, I felt really proud of that book for that one particular thing, which is I had never seen a publisher sales rep depicted in a novel before. You know,
That's
it feels
true, yeah.
like most of the time, you know, there are booksellers and there's publishers, or maybe sometimes there's an agent like in Wonder Boys, but like these kind of like that I thought I could depict a few things that I hadn't seen in a book before, basically.
So they turned this book into a film as well, and I've seen that you've written the screenplay. So, like, what's the difference between writing a screenplay and writing a novel? Is it like the same? Is it very different? How was that for you? And like to turn your own material into a movie?
Well, I mean, that one was a pretty easy screenplay in certain ways because it's fairly short. A book like Tomorrow is a more difficult screenplay, you know. I think this has a simpler movement that makes it a little bit easier to adapt. I think it's very different. You know, I think when I'm writing a novel, it's all possibility. It's not like there's no practicality to it. Like, how will you do this on screen? It's more just like, what could I do? You know, and so in a sense, when you go to work on a screenplay, it's less creative. It's more like being an architect, you know, drawing up blueprints for it. And so actually, no, it's not even like being an architect. It's more like, it is more like just somebody who's drawing up a blueprint for something for somebody else to do, you know, and so I'm aware of that. You know, screenplays just have so many rules that they follow. You know, they have to be in, you know, 3 acts. They have to be from 90 to 115 to 20 pages. You know, they have to basically, you know, show movement through external action and that kind of thing. And so in a sense, I enjoy it, but almost like I enjoy solving like a math problem, you know. It's not so much like the kind of, I think, high creative work of writing a novel or something like that. But I do enjoy that because of the ways in which it's quite different than writing a novel. You know, to me, it feels like, you know, using an entirely different set of tools. I think it's not optimal to write a screenplay of your own material until like several years have passed, you know. And then sometimes even you're able to modestly fix things that bothered you, you know, when you make a screenplay.
Also, you can improve your own work.
Sometimes I'm like, I can improve this from what I did, you know,
Okay.
at that time. But yeah, so but I enjoy the process of it as long as it has like proper separation, you know. And I was involved a lot in the making of the film, and that was an interesting experience as well. Like we did shoot the movie in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, like on in an island like where Fikri would actually be. And so that was a nice experience meeting all of those booksellers and island people from the actual places. Yeah.
Perfect. So I see that our time is slowly running out. Just like, is there a film of Tomorrow and Tomorrow planned, or?
There is a film planned. You know, I sold the movie rights very early in the process. I think they sold the same week as the book rights sold. So the people were very excited about it, which was nice. And I think that was, you know, it was unexpected for me, like how enthusiastic movies were about to make this thing. However, I would say that I think it wants to be more of like a limited series or a television show. I think this story is too complicated to nicely like fit itself into the confines of a screenplay. So I sort of hope that what happens is it becomes television and doesn't become a movie. Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
So, thank you too. Like, any last words to the booksellers and publishers and everyone else who is there?
Well, thank you so much for the prize. I mean, it feels like amazing. It feels inconceivably amazing, really, you know, and it's just, again, I said it before, but and you know now because we talked about AJ Fikri that I've spent a lot of time thinking about booksellers, but it is a particular honor when the booksellers choose to honor your work, because I think both the number of books booksellers are forced to read and the ways in which they are thinking about them, not just from their own point of view, but from the point of view of their readers, you know, so both the depth of experience and of, I guess, actual wisdom when it comes to books, it makes it feel very meaningful to me. So.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
So, thank you for joining us, and have a great day. Yeah, you still have the day ahead of you. Yeah.
I do. And have a good night. You have a night of rest ahead of you. Or maybe something more fun. Bye. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye. Bye-bye. Okay, so thank you everyone for watching. Ich glaube, ich tue jetzt wieder auf Deutsch wechseln. Falls es nicht passt, falls es nicht passt, in Deutsch einfach sagen. Aber vielen Dank fürs Zuschauen. Es war mir eine Ehre, genau das Gespräch mit Gabrielle Zevin zu führen. Danke auch fürs Teilnehmen am heutigen Tag, wer bei anderen Veranstaltungen dabei war. Ich wünsche allen einen guten Abend und eine gute Nacht. Genau. Und bis bald.